its role. I wonder, could you just reflect for a minute on what we've just seen in this ASEAN chairmanship and sort of look forward maybe to the next when the Philippines takes over and what the challenges are that you see?
Well, similar to my answer last night, it's like individualized rather than institutionalized. A lot of things that were accomplished during the last ASEAN summit was headed or led by Prime Minister Anwar, similar to something that happened in 2011 when Dr. Mati do a peace deal between Thailand and Cambodia as well. So it's really up to the individual during that period of moment where the centrality would happen or not. It's not as institutionalized things. And when you talk about this, you cannot just talk about it as a snapshot. You might have to think about it as a long-term thing and two sides of the coin. There are things we managed to have a ceasefire, we managed to have a peace deal, but at what price? Are we being forced by external actors that is outside ASEAN that is happening as well? And what about the crisis in Myanmar? What about the South China Sea? What about the Mekong region problems that never materialized? So just because you have one accomplished snapshot that was led by an individual doesn't mean that ASEAN centrality is something that is going on. So,
okay, yeah. Huang, I mean, your sense, Peter seems to be saying, don't get too excited about ASEAN's role in the future of Asian sort of architecture. I mean, is that your reflection as well?
I think, I agree. I mean, the worry about Thai-Cambodia peace deal or ceasefire and the ceremonial around it was more for photo op than the real and lasting commitment to that. I mean, it's much longer for everyone to be observing. But for Mr. Trump, who sort of hijacked the whole show, was just about a few minutes of photo opportunity. Having said that, though, I think ASEAN for a long time has been criticized for ritualism, a lot of that symbolism, and perhaps at times that was heavier than substance. There are anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000 meetings of ASEAN a year where a lot of things are just for meeting rather than pushing all the important agenda that Peter, for example, already listed. But if you understand the value of that symbolism, I thought the meeting serves the purpose for that. The expectations were low. The expectations was the symbolism. But for any ASEAN chair, it was always the test whether the United States leader will come to the region or not, as a symbol if Southeast Asia is still relevant or not for the United States. So, and I think the expectations were low because nobody really thought that Trump will come, but he did. So I think that was a win for symbolism and ritualism of ASEAN. And this time around, it was not just ASEAN wanting something from a United States president. It was the United States president wanting something from ASEAN, which is the platform for the photo opportunity. So sort of tables have turned a little bit, right? I think everybody got, all kind of deals that they can all come back and claim success, win, or victory. One way or another. We can dive into each and really dissect which ones do make sense and for whom. But we had a win-win-win situation. Win for Trump, he could claim. Win for China as well because of the meetings later that Trump and Xi had, and win for ASEAN countries that hosted and had been able to exercise precisely that power of convening, that power of centrality, and that major powers, even if they don't speak to each other, they did on the sidelines of regional gatherings.
But it's not just a photo op. it's a rare earth MOU that
Yes.
they can finally counter with the Chinese.
Yeah, but who wins again? This is another
So
story. but
that's
it's-
why I was trying to say the price of peace.
Yeah.
You know,
We're
it
going to
might be
hear about
something.
rare earths from our next speaker in a minute. Your point about endless ASEAN meetings, I remember the United Kingdom was trying to become a deeper partner with ASEAN. I remember a friend in Singapore saying that they were mystified as to why European countries wanted to turn up at ASEAN meetings when people in ASEAN tried to work out how they could turn up at fewer of these meetings. So, let me ask about the two, in a sense, where Southeast Asia fits in the big global picture. First on security and then on economics. So the sort of endless refrain that observers of Southeast Asia hear is that Southeast Asia doesn't want to have to choose between the two big regional powers, between the US and China. The Lee Kuan Yew School recently put out some research where they had tracked various metrics of sort of positioning between the US and China, and it showed pretty clearly, albeit not hugely, that every country in the region had got a little bit closer to China over the last 10 or 20 years. I wondered if you might kind of reflect on that, as in, is it true, as is often reported in global media, that most countries in Southeast Asia are sort of shifting away from the US and towards China, particularly under Trump? Or is it more complicated than that?
This is the study that started with the Philippines and keep going down
That's
the
it.
countries.
Yeah, that's it.
And they show the 10-year gap from 2015 to 2025.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it was only the Philippines and the Malaysians that are not shifting as much as Laos and Cambodians, where the gap was really big when it's going towards the Chinese, correct?
That's it.
Yeah, in case I can speak for Thailand, for my country, it's a perfect storm of two things. So it was during a military coup that happened in Thailand, when it was President Obama at the time, and all the EU leaders stopped the kind of trade negotiation, the kind of relationship that was happening. And it was the first Trump 1.0. So it's a perfect storm that the Americans were thinking about American first, and at the same time, the Thai military government was not very welcome. And those two perfect storm combined push Thailand towards the Chinese camp very much in every dimension possible. Tourism, retail, mining, manufacturing, e-commerce, and we felt the American absence for sure during that time. So it was a perfect storm for Thailand for that to happen.
So there is this isn't a kind of myth that in a sense, whether voluntarily or having been forced, that there has been this shift, at least in Thailand.
That's what I felt, yes.
I mean, Huang, you know Vietnam very well, but you also watch the whole region. I mean, is this sense of Southeast Asia sort of tilting in China's direction? Is that a fair reflection of the way things are going?
So this study is interesting because it has a little bit of historical comparison. So if you look back, China was not as an option as it is now. So you have to take that to account as well. And if I compare to other indexes that have come up also in recent years, like Lowy Institute in Australia index also showcased some of that, and also, the Institute of Southeast Asian Studies in Singapore does its annual poll of the state of region on its own. If you compare all of the existing indexes, yes, I think there is a certain shift in certain factors towards China, just because its power grew for the last decades or more or so, and it become more of an option for Southeast Asia. But if you look at specific things, and you mentioned Vietnam is quite an interesting case because it has a shift towards more US in its recent history if you compare that. But overall, if you look at military and joint exercises, US still is a preferred option, right? Like perhaps economics and other are more towards China, but in terms of security, I think, and education perhaps, maybe not, with exception from Trump's second term, was still US, right? But I would also say that the factor that affects these choices or perceived choices or options that the countries take is that China is perceived as a resident actor that is not going to go anywhere, whereas United States can come and go. And so, if you have a choice that may show up and may not show up, for US, Southeast Asia is optional. It'd be good for its global power, but it's not essential. For China, on the other hand, it's direct, they call it periphery. Which they're never going to give up on. So I think Southeast Asia understand that, and that reliability, the need to work with China one way or another is also a factor in those polls.
I mean, I suppose that having lived in Southeast Asia for nearly a decade, it strikes me that it's getting harder not to choose. And a good example of this came in the Trump meeting with the deals that President Trump signed with Malaysia and Cambodia respectively, which have buried within them what the trade experts call poison pill provisions, where if they then sign certain other types of deals with China, then there's a kind of immediate consequence from the US. And the same is true in terms of choosing between different tech stacks. I mean, how are countries like Vietnam or around the region, how are they trying to navigate a world in which the two superpowers are putting more conditions on their relationships to sort of try and disadvantage each other?
Yeah, so I always said, in case of Vietnam or any other country you can replace in the choice between US and China, Vietnam will always choose Vietnam. So all the countries in the region will also have the same formula. I mean, they will work and choices will be selective. I agree that the room for maneuver for hedging is narrowing, and certainly we're not talking about one definitive lasting choice. We are talking about choices in plural and in many times multiple choices. Those dots that you drew, and also minilaterals that can be issue specific. You can choose US on one issue, joint exercises. You can choose China on other issues, for example, right? And so they might be multiplying, multiple choices, and they're fluid. They can change at any time, and that makes hard work for everyone, because US and China have to work harder to compete, but also the countries that are making choices have to work harder to, manage this all competing interests, and perhaps at sometimes quite risky moves that is balancing it between the major powers. So I think the situation in general will make those choices harder, and not based on shared values or any alignment or loyalty to alliances, but it was going to be very, very pragmatic.
A la carte and not a buffet.
Yeah.
Do you agree?
Yes, I agree. I think a la carte and buffet, but not all the ASEAN countries can say what she said. I think if I were to think aloud, I think Vietnam can, Indonesia can, Malaysia might, but the rest of the ASEAN countries,
because of their proximity to China,
because they have that capability to do it.
Right.
Vietnam has its own capability, its own domestic market. Indonesia can. Malaysia could diversify into both OECD and RCEP and also TPP and things like that. But not all the countries have that kind of ability to actually, I want a la carte from here and a la carte from there, rather than a bandwagoning buffet from one camp because you're being pushed to one side.
But that's also a matter of expanding that strategic space.
Yes.
And agency that we mentioned about activism.
Yes.
So countries are working harder to make that space available.
Yes.
Create that strategic.
But some countries are choosing convenience.
Yeah,
so.
that's right.
Let me ask about the sort of geoeconomic side of this. So when we had the Liberation Day tariffs earlier this year, it was very striking that the trade-dependent Southeast Asian, or sort of trade powerhouses in Southeast Asia, Vietnam in particular, which got, 40-something initial tariffs, 49% was it? Thailand, Malaysia, Philippines, Indonesia, they were all clobbered by the first round. And so it really looked as if, in its new anti-trade stance, the US was targeting some of the most successful countries in the previous era of globalization. So, I mean, Peter, you must have thought a lot about this, about Thailand's economic model, were you to have become prime minister. I mean, in a sense, is the model that helped Southeast Asia or parts of Southeast Asia go from poor countries to being middle, and in Thailand's case, sort of upper middle income country. Is that model now over, or does it still have some distance left to run, even despite the kind of problems in the global trading system?
Over due to the index graph that Nico showed just in the very beginning.
Right.
You saw the FDI coming down, and he wanted me to yes, thank you. Over. It's the corruption when compared to Vietnam. You know, it's the human capital when we compare to Vietnam and to Malaysia. And we haven't upgraded it for a long time due to our political uncertainty after the military took over, and that looks like that. So it's really something that we couldn't find a way to move forward. So when something incidental such as COVID crisis or the Liberation Day, just like you said, it shocked the system because of the over-reliance on globalization, over-reliance on trade and investment and things like that, because we have nothing inside. If Thailand was a country, we would have a very big head, very weak core, small arms and small legs, because we just concentrated too much on a certain industry or certain companies without upgrading or reskilling our people.
And is that a sort of, I mean, sorry to point to Thailand's poor performance on this measure, but is that unusual for Thailand, or is it a common problem across the rest of the region, as in
not at all.
Southeast Asia did very well in
this is up to 2024, right? So if you combine ASEAN incoming FDI is 230 billion US, going to China is 160. So 2024 was the year that foreign direct investment from all over the world, because of the China plus one or the friendshoring that happened, that companies try to diversify. ASEAN incoming FDI in 2024 was more than the Chinese. Yeah. Was more than China, but Thailand is the one that's lagging behind.
In a sense, I mean, in your talk last night, yes, you talked about South and Southeast Asia as the new growth drivers and this point. So are you sort of optimistic about Southeast Asia and not about Thailand, if you sort of...
Yes, because it's Asia society, not Thai society. So I was coming here to be an Asian man, talk about Asia, talk about ASEAN. But yeah, I mean, if you talk about my country, the number shows in God I trust, the rest brings data. So.
I want to ask about Thailand specifically in a minute, but Huong, I mean, from a perspective of Vietnam is the great success story of the last decade or two. I mean, it's an astonishing sort of trade powerhouse, 200% trade to GDP ratio, and the country that is always mentioned, as Milan talked about with respect to India, as one of the relative winners from the China plus one situation. So in a sense, is it just that the rest of Southeast Asia needs to be more like Vietnam, or is Vietnam's situation unusual?
Well, hold your horses.
What's the secret sauce?
Well, hold your horses, because yes, as the great power competition, Trump first term, and competition with China, Vietnam was indeed labeled as the greatest winner of the great power competition. But now with the Trump's tariff since April, the Liberation Day, some already called Vietnam the biggest loser of the tariff war, which I shared earlier in the lunch with some of the participants as well. So yes, there was a moment where countries in the region, Thailand, Malaysia, and all of the regional neighbors says, see how Vietnam is being able to not only maneuver in this, tense geopolitical environment, but actually thrive when, the great power competition creates a more tense landscape. At this time, we're yet to see whether it is the biggest winner or biggest loser in this tariffs war. I do think there's some headwinds and crosswinds ahead of Vietnam. But I would want to point out that Vietnam is in a way dissimilar to others, because it was isolated up to the 90s, really. It didn't have trade with the US or the Western world much until the 90s. It picked up, socialized in the international diplomatic and trade system, and in a very successful way. So it learned its position in the global supply chain, how to operate in the international global trade system. It got good at it. It got a lot of FTAs, one of the highest. It follows the Singapore example with a lot of expanding this trade to GDP and expanding the FTA networks. And all of that just to prove that, we are throwing this known global free trade system out of the window, or at least some are challenging it. So, for countries like Vietnam that have been trying to adapt to the world, it's quite a shock to the system. And now that it has to unlearn that or has to adopt to the new reality. I think it is more complex than that, because Vietnam will not be affected on its own with this China +1 and transshipment tariffs that President Trump announced, not only to Vietnam but also the transshipment goods and Thailand and others, that has components or any components from China that will make things much more complicated, and a lot of which is outside of Vietnam complete control. All of the products made in Vietnam, or most of the products, have lots of components from China and elsewhere. So I think we are also seeing things as some mission impossible there if the tariff was exactly to follow the Trump's announcements.
Let me ask one more big picture economic question, which is about a topic that almost dominates conversation here in Europe, the China shock 2.0 involution, the sort of Chinese excess manufacturing capacity. I mean, it struck me a couple of years ago that as Europe was waking up to this, that the other countries that could be the biggest losers from this are the trade powerhouses of Southeast Asia, because they are the economies that have created niches in global supply chains that China is now going to swamp with as its industries move up the value chain. So clearly, as you will have picked up in a conference like this, as we heard from Abigail, Europeans are terrified about this. Is this also perceived now to be a major challenge in countries like Thailand and around Southeast Asia?
Automotive specifically, like you can see overproduction, overcapacity that is coming towards ASEAN. When it goes to Vietnam sort of work around it. When it goes to Indonesia, Indonesians block it. When it goes to Singapore allows only certain brands. But if you go to Thailand, everything is Chinese EVs nowadays. Now the problem is that it's not just that you have a new clean green vehicles on the country, but it cannibalizes the automotive industry that the Germans and the Japanese had built for the country for a very long time. So no more engines, no more transmission, no more carburetors. So those industries that were trying to prosper within the country for the past 40, 50 years is gone within one wipe of overcapacity, overproduction of automotives in China. Obviously, it's not only to be sold within China because they wanted to go to Southeast Asia or to South America. It's very, very visible for Thailand.
Okay. Similar in Vietnam or no? No automotive industry there?
No, there is some automotive industry. There's ambitions. I mean, VinFast is gearing towards EV, and it had make a big investment in the United States. But yes, I guess it is still quite nascent for Vietnam, much more than compared to Thailand or Malaysia for that matter. So I think that would be quite vulnerable for the shocks and yet to stand the test.
Let me ask you about one in turn about the sort of two biggest regional flashpoints that Southeast Asia has struggled to manage. The first being Myanmar. So, I mean, Peter, could you? It's obviously a very important security issue for Thailand, given the length of the border, but in general, it has been a hugely divisive issue for Southeast Asia as a whole, and ASEAN has struggled to manage this. But for people who haven't been paying attention, sort of where stands the conflict in Myanmar, and what is the hope for some kind of resolution, or in a sense, is it sort of stretching on into the middle distance as an unsolvable conflict?
So the latest development is that the military junta is trying to have an election on December 28th under such a martial condition in the country. And I was hoping that during the ASEAN summit, to your first question, that foreign ministers in ASEAN would start questioning about the election in such a condition that is not free, not inclusive, not participative, but none came out of that ASEAN summit. And it's quite fragmented in the sense that they have a lot of ethnic groups, maybe 18, with different imagination of what post-war Myanmar would look like. I mean, the conflict and the firing continues, the killing continues. It's a quiet tragedy. But I feel like from talking to various groups, whether it's NUG or whether it's other ethnic groups along the border of Thailand, they have different imagination, and the risk of balkanization is very high to me. Like one would came to here, meet me in Geneva, and say that federation is the way to go for Myanmar. Another group that I meet fighting the military junta would say the United States is the model to go after the post-war. So it's not just what's going on at the moment, it's not just the classical civil war that is going on, but in the future, even if there's a reconciliation, there's peace, the risk of balkanization, of separating into 18 states, or the imagination of the post-war Myanmar would look like is very grim. And I would argue, with the proximity between Thailand and Myanmar, if Thailand does not get involved, ASEAN is not going to move. I mean, Indonesia and Malaysia and Singapore can say whatever they want, but they don't have that asset and the liability of having the border to maneuver, to find the right amount of pressure and incentive for the people of Myanmar to get together on the negotiation table and do something about it. I feel like there's an issue with frontier states, meaning India, China, and Thailand as well. And I'm trying to understand what India is thinking about the situation, what the Chinese are thinking about the situation, because Myanmar is a resource-cursed country. Critical minerals, rare earth, gas pipeline, the ability for China to exit not from the right side, but to the left side through Myanmar, or even the Southeast Asia that I was talking about, to have the rail come in from Chennai all the way to Southeast Asia. You got to pass through Myanmar, so it's very strategic to the sense that you don't know what the frontier states are thinking, or what the international actors are thinking about this.
Okay, so all right, that sounds moderately pessimistic, but Huang, can I ask you about the other big regional flashpoint, which is the South China Sea? We haven't seen a big clash in recent times, but there's an underlying tempo of incidents, particularly with the Philippines, but to some degree with Vietnam, which are the two countries that contest most forcefully China's expansive claims in the region. I mean, can you just say a little bit about where that stands? Is it fair to say that China is continuing to sort of push forward with its claims, or is a sort of rough détente been reached?
It's going to be a long, probably maybe even longer run with this South China Sea disputes, because the claims really date back, and I don't see any other way of resolving. Even there have been attempts to clarify the claims that Philippines took China to the International Tribunal, and actually next year we mark the 10th anniversary of it. So, and Philippines will be the chair of ASEAN, so there might be some further action on that. But in terms of claims, it is a multi-party claims. It involves China, a number of Southeast Asian countries, but potentially it also could involve United States by the virtue of alliance with the Philippines, but also interests that the United States has in the region, and other actors, even including European actors, that which trade also pass through the South China Sea. So it's certainly not something easy to resolve, nor do we see any potential possibility in that. But I think certainly China is advancing its control over the disputed waters. The reclamation of islands and militarization of the islands are happening, whether with the PCA ruling or not. And China is not, of course, the only one. We talk about Vietnam also doing that, Philippines and Malaysia to the lesser degree. Everybody is trying to do something to advance the claims. What worries us is the intensified numbers of military operations. Peter mentioned gray zone yesterday. They are indeed in full swing, and oftentimes, they're no longer gray zone. I mean, the multilateral attempt to manage the disputes is through ASEAN's Code of Conduct negotiation. But those Code of Conduct negotiations have been also for 2 decades or so, and they still can't settle on certain language, and they're still being discussed in the framework of what traditionally has been understood of these claims. Meanwhile, the gray zone operations have been sophisticated. There are new tactics applied, technology of war, information war, and other subversive techniques that necessarily have not been caught up in those Code of Conduct negotiations. So there are, and of course, environmental issues that we haven't even mentioned. But the biggest risk right now are those collisions at sea that may further escalate unintentionally. So I think what we can agree on that all parties, despite their very nationalistic claims, can agree that no one wants an intentional war. But what we worry about is the unintended escalations of accidents.
What would Vietnam say to a joint ASEAN Coast Guard?
I think that's another thing that Southeast Asian, as you know, Peter, have a hard time with in terms of this kind of cooperation. First of all, their interests are not exactly aligned, and so that would be also, some of neighbors do have overlapping claims, so that's a first obstacle. Of course, is a trust issue, which is a huge deficit in Asia, I would say, mutual trust.
Okay.
And also, non-interference, like, the core principle of ASEAN. So all of that says probably not so soon.
So it has to be like ASEAN minus X.
We have just under 2 minutes left, and I know Nico will start staring at me if we go second over. So, Peter, final kind of question to you, which is on democracy. One of the main themes of people who look at Southeast Asia is the sort of the balance between sort of democracy and military rule, authoritarian rule. You look around the region, you have different models. I mean, you were a kind of pro-democracy campaigner. You had your own issues with the Thai regime. How are you feeling sort of optimistic about that in the future within the region, or?
Only to the new generation, to the youth, whether it's the youth of Indonesia fighting dark Indonesia, the youth in the Philippines fighting corruption about the water, also the youth in Thailand. We have this thing called siblings. SEA is Southeast Asia, and Bling is like siblings, like brothers and sisters, trying to help one another to fight autocrats in the country. So with this kind of alliance and this kind of new movement of younger generation, then there's a bit of hope. In Thailand specifically, each year we have about 1 million new voters coming out every year. So if they're 14 now, there'll be 18 in 4 years. If they're 15 now, there'll be 19. If they're 16, there'll be 20. So for me to be banned, according to James' question, for 10 years, that's almost like 10 million new voters during that time that I could think is an opportunity to capture and look at it in a positive side. But it's not automated for sure. Going around the world with what happened in America, just because they are young doesn't mean that they will vote for me. So I have to empathize and mobilize them.
Okay. All right. So thank you very much to my panelists. We've covered a lot of ground. I'd invite you to give them a round of applause. Thank you very much, Peter and Kwong.
วันนี้ขอประกาศต่อหน้าทุกท่านในที่นี้ว่าเวลาของพวกเราได้มาถึงแล้ว
ดูคลิปจบแล้วอย่าลืมกดไลค์กดแชร์กดติดตามกดกระดิ่งให้ด้วยนะครับ